'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 446, All Roads Lead to Moscow. Last time, we saw a large pocket of trapped Soviet soldiers just east of Bialystok in former Poland develop as the panzers had raced ahead of them and then turned inward, enough to encircle those frontline troops. Next, Western Commander Dmitry Pavlov's deputy, General I.V. Bolden, flew into the pocket to lead a counterattack that would pierce the ever-shrinking German ring around them. This counterattack failed, of course, even before it got started, but a few weeks of continued resistance by Bolden saw him and about 2,000 others escape eventually. Still, overall, the Soviets were losing ground fast. To be sure, while this had been going on, Timoshenko, Pavlov's boss, ordered another defensive line to be set up. But each time, enough panzers had already bypassed the area, thus militarily, it made little sense. All the while, Stalin is ordering counterattack after counterattack. On the German side, Fedor von Bock, Army Group Center's master, wanted to leave behind the Bialystok pocket to others, and he wanted to move on to the Dnieper River as that was his given objective. But the OKH and Hitler in particular were more comfortable with delaying that objective if it meant the destruction of hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers, captured or killed. Von Bock was forced to focus on crushing this pocket before he would be given permission to move on. Not that all the panzer generals obeyed this halt order. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Maps continued as the Stavka, or High Command Committee, which had just gone through another alteration, ordered Marshal S.M. Bunyany to create another reserved front, using the 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd Armies, to be set up near Vitebsk, located just west of Smolensk. However, von Bock was trying to reach a point just east of Smolensk, which is about 270 miles or 434 kilometers west of Moscow. Someone was not going to achieve their goal. In fact, this forming Soviet line was spotted by long-range Luftwaffe patrols. But countering the Germans' growing intelligence of Soviet defenses, Zhukov told Stalin the next day, July 2nd, that there would soon be 2 more defensive lines behind the one now being formed at Vitebsk, and more if needed. Moscow would be shielded from the Germans' advance. A few days before this, Zhukov had ordered the West Front commander, General Dmitry Pavlov, to carry out several objectives. First, he was to establish firm control over the frontline units, or else they would be fighting piecemeal. Next, he was not to abandon tanks and artilleries when they retreated. But having said that, they were to evacuate Minsk, as it was probably going to go the way of all the other towns and cities fought over thus far. The last 2 orders were to, somehow, attack the Germans in such a way as to separate the panzers from the infantry. Ironically, the Germans were doing a pretty good job of this on their own, and they had a few scary moments when their armor had been left unprotected. And lastly, as Zhukov could well guess how this latest battle would turn out, Pavlov was to put a fraction of his force, mostly the cavalry, in the Rokitno marshes, aka the Privet or Minsk marshes. If one was to draw a straight line from Warsaw to Minsk, the marshes would be a bit south of this line, but closer to Warsaw. Zhukov wanted the German supply lines hounded restlessly, and he would get his wish, but at a horrible cost. Zhukov wanted these Soviet forces to become de facto partisans and raid the enemy's supply lines. He might not be able to stop the Germans' advance, but he could take advantage of it by attacking its supporting units, who would be less well armed. But even this was not enough for the Stavka. Their faith in Pavlov was dropping quickly. So Clement Voroshilov, commander of the short-lived Northwestern District, was sent to him to stiffen his resolve. And Voroshilov's first order was to get over their fear of the panzers. And that would come in time, with the appropriate weapons to conquer these metal beasts. But for now, fear was the correct choice. A side note to Voroshilov: this man was lucky enough to be alive at this moment, as he had been in charge of the Winter War, that is, Soviet Russia's invasion of Finland, which had cost the Soviets some 320,000 men, dead or wounded, to the Finns 70,000 casualties. Over a dinner, Stalin blamed Voroshilov for the losses, to which the general stood up, smashed a plate on the table while yelling, "No, we had those losses because you killed all of our best generals during the purges." But Stalin needed this scapegoat, so the man was allowed to live, if only to be blamed. Back to the story. Around this time, a few German maps were found, and they showed that Berlin was now coming for Moscow, if only to force Soviet armies to fight them so they could be destroyed. But as that was the case, it would have been militarily prudent for Pavlov to pull his forces back, or else let them get encircled, as were the men around Bialystok. But it would have taken a man far stronger than Pavlov to suggest to Stalin to pull back, so the request was never made. As we have seen, when Bolden tried to lead his counterattack out of the circle, he eventually got out with a fraction of the trapped troops. But partially making this escape possible, General Guderian had been forced to give up, temporarily, the 29th Motorized Division, so von Kluge could finish trapping and crushing the Soviet troops. But the 29th got into position a bit too late, due to Guderian's reticence in departing with this unit. Thus, Soviet men were able to make for the woods using dried-up riverbeds, as it was high summer. On another side note, the Messerschmitt Bf-110, not able to keep up with Allied fighters and thus suffered losses, found a new lease on life in the East as a ground attack aircraft. When Bolden was forced to abandon his many tanks, trucks, and jeeps, von Richthofen's 110s were able to reduce them all to mounds of rubble. Going back to Fast Heinz Guderian, as he was called, the commander of the 2nd Panzer Group wasn't overly concerned with encircling Pavlov, as he was continuing to push east. In fact, he was almost captured 2 days into Barbarossa. He and his had just pushed out the Soviet Fourth Army, who were protecting the southern route to Minsk. But his panzers had not destroyed the Fourth Army. They simply pushed them away. The Fourth Army came back and almost put their hands on the German general during a meeting. This left General Hoth to reduce Pavlov's pocket with his 57th Panzer Corps. Still, his 39th Panzer Corps did keep moving towards Minsk. Kind of. Hoth and Guderian were like-minded, as in an unmoving panzer is a useless panzer. But Hoth feared retribution more than did Guderian, so played by the rules, mostly. On June 28th at 4 p.m., the 12th Panzer Division entered Minsk. This was the beginning of the creation of an even larger pocket of trapped Soviet troops. Hoth had men and tanks to the northeast of Minsk, and Guderian was supposed to turn and go in that direction to meet up and thus close this latest trap. Instead, Fast Heinz kept moving east, his thoughts only of Moscow. However, a few days later, Guderian realized his mistake and sent back his 18th Panzer Division to close the hole to the southeast of Minsk. Of course, by then, men from the three pockets, Bialystok, another smaller one to the east, and now Minsk, had made good their escape. By this time, Stalin had recalled Pavlov to Moscow. He would be tried and executed, if only to serve as a warning to the other field commanders. Results matter. When Barbarossa was being planned out, Berlin knew that once Army Group Center reached Minsk, they would have a heavy decision to make. Either they would peel off von Bock's armor and send it north to help fight in the area south of Leningrad, or it would simply keep moving east to balance out Guderian's right-wing thrust of Army Group Center. But since a decision had yet to be formally made, Hoth and Guderian looked for ways to ignore von Kluge's orders and keep heading east, towards Moscow, towards glory. Next, Guderian sent General Walter Model, commander of his 3rd Panzer Division, right at the town of Bobruinsk, located about 75 miles southeast of Minsk. The Soviet troops there, blocking the movement of the panzers, had to be smashed before his advance could continue. Meanwhile, Hoth sent some of his panzers to a town to the northeast of Minsk. They were both bypassing enemy units to close the trap ASAP so they could then be allowed to head further east. Von Kluge, who had already had it up to here with these two prima donnas, threatened to court-martial them, but their results spoke for themselves. Yet it seems that Guderian wanted it more, as he sent his 18th and 17th Panzer Divisions to Borisov, a town that's on the main road from Minsk to Smolensk. If that town and road could be controlled by the Germans, then the way to Moscow was open, or so the Germans believed. But crushing hopes for a quick dash to Moscow, soon at Borisov, the 1st Moscow Motorized Division with 1,000 tanks, many of those T-34s and KVs, plus 500 guns, arrived and immediately began a counterattack to retake the town. Berlin reacted to this by creating new, smaller armies to put out these fires. After all, the 1st Moscow Motorized Division had to be dealt with. The way to Moscow still had to be opened. But now in German hands, thanks to the new Minsk pocket, were an additional 341,000 Russian POWs, 4,799 tanks, 9,427 guns, 1,777 planes, all kinds, and as for the men, an equal number of wounded and missing. In short, despite the growing chaos that was the Eastern Front, the initial plans of Barbarossa for Army Group Center had been met, which meant that marching on Moscow would only be a formality. And in truth, Moscow realized the situation it was in. A July 2nd Stavkov report read, "The disorganized and much weakened forces of the first echelon of the Red Army cannot halt the advance of the enemy." And yet, just days before, on June 30th, Hitler wrote the following to Mussolini: "The might and resources of the Red Army are far in excess of what we knew or even considered possible." Having said that, to ask almost any German in any of the army groups if Germany was going to win, the response would be, "Of course," delivered with a look of sadness for the questioner's obviously lack of intelligence. Yet on the other side, Stalin was just as flabbergasted. The Soviets were dealing with the situation that the entirety of their Western Front was about to collapse. If that happened, Moscow would probably fall, and sometime after that, the war in the East would be over. Thus, the complete strategic reserves that existed at that moment was sent to the Minsk, Smolensk, Moscow axis, now being called the Reserve Front, which makes sense as it was now manned by reserve units. On July 11th, the Soviet 16th and 19th Armies were moved up from a point just south of Kiev and placed above and below Smolensk. The 20th Army was pulled from the Moscow area and put on the main road between Minsk and Smolensk. The 21st Army was also put in between the two major towns, but a bit to the south, should Guderian try to swing around. and 3 other armies were sent to the area to establish a massively long and deep defensive line. Despite this show of military might by the Soviets, the Germans had also released their strategic reserve, in this case, the Second Army, and they, with the help of the panzers, found various points to cross whatever river was in front of them, be it the Dwina, Berezina, or Dnieper rivers. These bridgeheads were small, to be sure, but in time, millions of Axis troops would cross and expand them. The coming Soviet counterattacks here of the reserve forces also came with changes at the top. Stalin had Timoshenko take over for the doomed Pavlov, while General Bunyene, one of the original 5 marshals of the Soviet Union, thus his rank was only surpassed by Stalin himself, was put in charge of the reserve front. And with such a massive reserve force, Timoshenko had decided, taking a page from Stalin's book, to launch counterattacks versus waiting for the Germans to come at them. The main road from Minsk to Smolensk has on it the town of Orsha, and that location was a goal of the panzers as well. But it would be above and below this town that Timoshenko would launch his attacks. To the north of the main road, almost due north of Orsha, is Vitebsk, and to the west of that town is Lapel. These towns would see plenty of fighting. Timoshenko would launch the 20th Army, assisted by the 5th and 7th Mechanized Corps at the enemy, who had just taken Lapel, again to the north and west of Orsha, itself in between Minsk and Smolensk. Meanwhile, the 4th, 13th, and 21st Armies would attack the 2nd Panzer Group just south of this. Timoshenko had most of his hopes pinned on the 5th and 7th Mechanized Corps. It had 6 divisions within and just under 2,000 tanks. They would hit the Germans near the Lapel area, but more than just stop the enemy's advance, the Stavka, one of the elements of the panzer groups currently in Lapel, completely wiped out. There were to be no prisoners, they were to not chase, the invaders were to die where they stood, and that attack started on July 6th. The results were predictable enough. The Soviets went in hard, but they were barely trained. They certainly lacked anti-tank weapons and enough AA fire. Meanwhile, the Germans, with command of the skies, saw what was coming and prepared. The Russians came in with no reconnaissance, no way with communicating with each other, nor with a pre-attack artillery bombardment. And over the next few days, what tanks and other vehicles were not destroyed by the Luftwaffe were finished off by the 4 panzer divisions in the area. Not only did Hoth's panzers stop the counterattack, they punched a hole in between the Soviet 20th and 22nd Armies, clearing the way to Vitebsk, a bit to the east of Lapel and on the same road, that is, just above the main road. Seeing this, and trying not to panic, Timoshenko was forced to use his 19th Army to shield Vitebsk. These men had just arrived from Ukraine and were not only tired, but still unorganized. The 19th Army's commander, Lieutenant General Ivan Konev, threw in 2 of his divisions, the 220th Motorized Rifle and the 162nd Rifle. Like the men at Lapel, they were barely trained. Still, the 220th fought savagely and even kept the Germans to the west of Vitebsk for a whole day. But in their courage, many died, and thus the unit became weaker and weaker, setting up an eventual German victory. Another German victory. On a side note, Vitebsk had many thousands of Jews therein. This had to be known to some degree by the Germans, and surely their Einsatzgruppen troops would not be far behind to deal with the Jewish question. But thanks to Soviet resistance, though a short shelf life it had, some 22,000 Jews, about 58% of the city's population, managed to escape. Those that did not died a few months later in the Vitebsk Ghetto Massacre. The men of the 167th Rifle Division did less well. In fact, once the fighting started, many of them ran away. Not that this saved many of them, as the Luftwaffe and German artillery cut the men down mid-run. On the southern end of this massive counterattack, near Rogashev, it went even worse for the Russians. The Soviets charged forward, were decimated soon after, or they fled or were encircled. This Timoshenko counteroffensive, as Guderian would call it in his memoirs, handed Stalin his latest loss that cost Mother Russia at least 832 tanks, hundreds of guns, tens of thousands of Soviet lives, but worse, in strict military terms, it left the road to Smolensk open. Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of the World War II podcast. Joining me, even though I didn't ask them to, is Ryan Fairfield and Tony Lupo of the Warrior Next Door podcast, a podcast dedicated to sharing oral histories from veterans, powerful stories with lessons from the past. Guys, thanks very much for coming back on the show.
As we said, this is our third year where you've actually invited us back, Ray.
Right.
And we're eternally grateful for that. We said this last year, we'll say it again, that we have an audience now because of you. There are other things that we've done to connect with people, but the largest influx of like-minded individuals have come from you being gracious enough to have us on your show. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know how many times we've gotten comments from our listeners that say, I found you through the Ray Harris podcast. And we really appreciate it. We're just always indebted to you.
So. Hey, man.
No problem. Yeah. For the record, you invited yourself, but we're not going to split hairs. Don't even worry about it.
So that's actually a great segue, Ray, because we put together a special segment for you. We're going to call it the Warrior Next Door look back. So you've invited us, or we have imposed us on your podcast for the past 3 years.
Right.
And so we put some clips together about how that went. And given the nature of how it went in the past, we're actually quite surprised that you even have us on right now.
Yeah.
So
well, that's a valid point.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to who we think is the real brains behind this, who's allowing this on. But so this first clip we're going to play, Ray, is from the first time we were on your show in November of 2021. And it was Ryan and I were geeking out doing this Ford Chevy thing versus the B-24 and the B-17.
Oh,
Yeah. See, Ryan's the B-17 advocate. I'm the B-24. I'll even say that the B-17 is overrated. Yep, that's a hot take. And then Ray, here we are, first time on your show. We're like nothing burgers. We still are compared to you. But at the end of the day, you just wanted to throw your head in the ring and just kind of share your takes on this. And it didn't go quite as well as we had thought. Ryan, go ahead and play that.
And yeah, like you were saying, Churchill, obviously loved the B-24. But if you're an 18 or 19-year-old kid and you're in the Pacific and you've got a B-17 that looks like it's been put through the ringer a couple dozen times, but it doesn't matter. If it gets you there and back, you're going to fall in love, and you don't want to see any other plane because that's what you know.
Ray, you're absolutely right, and that was a low blow, right? Because here I am, I've tried to defend the B-24, and then you put that on the table because.
Okay, so I think it was Tony who was bawling me out a couple of seconds ago. That's never happened on my show before, but I did.
So we're happy on one hand that we were able to produce like a history of World War II first on your show, but unfortunately it was because here you are, you are magnanimous, you get us on the show, and then we disrespect you, or I disrespect you, and so imagine in 2022, the next year, when you had us back on, I was kind of like, holy crap, I wonder if he's still a little pissed off about how we played that. Now I'm sure. No, well, we didn't know that. So this happened pretty quickly in the 2022 episode from last year. Apparently you didn't forget. Go ahead, Ryan.
am equally thankful that you guys, even Ryan, are doing what you're doing. I really do appreciate it. I know, Tony, you probably do most of the work, but it really is appreciated. Good stuff.
Here's what's awesome about this, Ray. First off, you remembered, but then you attacked the wrong person. You attacked Ryan, and I was the one. And then here's what's even more exceptional. Ryan's my friend, and I didn't even come to his aid. I was like,
wow.
You actually threw me under the bus, Tony.
I did.
If I remember correctly. And you were happy that you did it.
I was very, very pleased with myself.
Your true colors bled through shiningly, very brightly.
What color does a jerk wear? Because that's what I am apparently.
Yeah. So, I was going to say, Tony, look up the word friend in the dictionary. I think you're gonna. I don't think it means what you think it means.
I apparently not. But it doesn't really end there, because in that same episode last year, we started realizing, Ray really doesn't want us on this show. There was someone else who had the magnanimity, who had understood the human frailty, the human condition, to say, you know what, these guys need another chance. And quite frankly, Ray, this person's a bigger person than you. Go ahead and play this.
Yeah, I literally wanted to say, because I told my wife this last night, that y'all were coming back on the show, and then she said something smart like, well, you should just have them on every November. I'm like, fine. If it's going to be a Thanksgiving thing, then just book it in your books now.
I like how your wife thinks, Ray.
Yeah,
so do we.
She
Ray.
really is the compass for your show, apparently.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, she's smarter than I am, but I got to be honest, that's not saying very much. So, no, she's impressed with herself quite easily. Anyway,
so go ahead. We have one more clip. So after this, we wanted to thank your wife for allowing us to be back on your show. And we thought, everything's copacetic now. I'm sure that's true. And just a mere 3 weeks ago, we get this cryptic email from you. I don't know. You're probably on some medications from your illness or whatever.
Quote unquote NyQuil.
NyQuil, yeah. Whatever you're taking over there in the Carolinas.
We grow our own. Sorry,
that's right.
So basically you ask us, hey, can you go ahead and take the material I prepared and then produce an episode? And we're like, oh my gosh, this is like Jay Leno asking us to sit in or to be a guest host. And we're like, hell yeah. So we bust our ass and we put this together and we're so excited about it. Mm-hmm. And then we anticipate the intro, and this is what we get. Go ahead and play it.
Programming note. Hey everyone, Ray here. My health issues are playing tag with me, and they tagged back in. So I have the next episode written, but as you can probably tell from my voice, I'm not reading anything anytime soon. So I had two gentlemen, I use that term loosely, who've been on the show, and they're going to do this episode for me this week. Tony Lupo and Ryan Fairfield from the Warrior Next Door podcast. I stand by that statement.
We dropped everything to help you, and you torched us.
Yeah. Hey, well, who started it?
I know.
It's really the only thing that I'm focused on.
The bald guy in the middle of the screen here is the one who started it all.
So really, what I think I've learned from these clips putting together is that I'm a jerk. Ray is a Ukrainian grandmother who will hold a grudge forever against the Russians. And Ryan has bullet holes in both sides of his body from being caught in a crossfire.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. Again,
on to business. Yeah.
Yes. So no, I'm glad you guys are here, because even though now it's gotten to the point where I think of when you guys come on the show, that's my good charity for the year. I don't have to be nice to anybody for the rest of the year. No, I'm glad you're here.
Well, you need to do it at the beginning of the year then, so you got the whole rest of the year to do whatever you want.
Good point. Okay, next year I'll do it better. But I was thinking, it's like, okay, why have these guys back on? Because I was going to make a horrible joke. But anyway, what I got reminded by listening to the last episode that y'all were on is I can read all the books I want. I can write these episodes up and I can deliver them in the masterful way that I do. But hearing from the original, participants, it reminds you that these are normal people, flesh and blood, who had lives, and their lives were altered by this horrific event. And they just did the best they could to get through, because that's what we all do, survive, daily. And so I'm glad that you're back on, because you got some very powerful stories. And again, it just reminds us that these are not historical figures. these are people just like us.
Mm-hmm. Amen. And to amplify that, I had a chance to listen to an episode you dropped very recently. It might be your most recent one. It was Luis Andres Moore.
Right.
And it spoke to like the shared mission that we have. I mean, you are sharing the history. You do it in a way that is really popular, really structured, thoroughly researched. And Ryan and I aren't following a timeline like you are, but we're trying to well, let me just put it this way. One of the things about Luis Andres Moore during the podcast that really struck me was, one, how little her father spoke to her at being a machine gunner during World War II about what he did during the war. Yeah. I mean, his wife dies, and now the family's taking care of him. And I think what she said during a podcast is about half. So first off, she collected information about these stories as time. It's like for 17 years.
Yes.
17 years.
That's amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And about half of it was anecdotes and stories that were shared to her by family and friends. And it got me thinking about the Veterans History Project, the Warrior Next Door podcast, where we take these interviews that Ryan and I conducted. These are, you know this, Ray, these are interviews that we sat in our living room. We connected with these people. We went to their memorial services. We just had one of those a couple months ago. But at the end of the day, what we've learned is that when we roll into someone's house as kind of a disinterested observer, so to speak, they open up to us way more than family. We're able to provide them the DVD of their parents or grandparents or grandmother's experience, which helps the family. And then we've learned that there's some therapy associated with these individuals being able to talk about it. And I just really wanted to reach out to Louise, and it's like, I wish we had met you 17 years earlier. I would have loved to have talked to your dad. We probably would have had a better chance of getting some of these stories down than she did. But it really amplified the need that families have to have these stories as part of their shared heritage. And then lastly, for people like us, where we've got the stories from them that speaks to how humans behave when things are going exceptionally bad or exceptionally well or everything in between. I mean, really what we're talking about, these clips that we're about ready to play are case studies on a human condition. What do different humans do when they're faced with starvation?
Good point.
When they're faced with liberation, when we take for granted all these things, these people are teaching us what we shouldn't take for granted. So I really love that. It was a great freaking episode. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ryan. Ryan's going to take care of the first set of clips. And basically what we're doing is the same thing last year. We're taking some clips from the 12 or so people that we featured over the course of a year and just sharing them with you guys so we can talk about them.
Excellent.
All right. Well, our first guy that we're going to show you guys or have you listen to is a guy named Leo Westerholm. He was a combat medic in the 101st Airborne and actually in the 501st. And he actually jumped at D-Day at 1 a.m. Out of a C-47 very near the town of Carentan. And what we've got here, this is actually, we recovered Leo in series number 29 of this year. And we started broadcasting that on May the 29th of 2023. The interview itself took place almost exactly 20 years ago to the day on December the 5th, 2003.
Wow.
And Leo has a very clear voice, and he can tell that he's told his story a lot because he's got a great storytelling nature to his voice here. But anyway, the first clip here is him talking about what it was like being inside that plane as it approached the drop zone.
Away we went. Planes took off at about just when it got dark at 10 o'clock. And they were all pulling a glider. And the planes took off, and I mean, tell me, we prayed for that plane. They seemed like they just couldn't get off the ground. Finally, they got off the ground. And them poor motors were straining like hell. And they took off and kept going, and we flew from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, coming close to about 12:45. Then suddenly we started seeing lightning. And then we started hearing hail. That was flak hitting the planes and ripping through the planes. and guys all of a sudden hollering, "Help, I'm been hit!" And I said, "Oh my God, how can I fix anybody up in the plane here?" Well, we had been told, don't worry about anybody that's hit. Just let them leave them in the plane, let them come back. So I didn't take them. We just had orders to unhook them. And then the next thing you know, the green light came on, and out we went. And I was man number 23, except there was 3 fellows I had to step over. They had blood all over the floor of the airplane, and blood on aluminum flooring is slick, slick, slick. And we were slipping around in that damn stuff, and I was glad to get out of there. And just as I got to the door, the guy in front of me was an infantryman. He stumbled and fell with his head out the door. Okay? And I was right behind him, so I just stepped right on top of him, and I went out in front of him.
So, I mean, Leo's obviously got a great way to kind of tell these stories and everything. And the next clip here is what it was like. You'll hear Tony about 20 years ago, so he sounds like he's 15. But you'll hear him ask, what did you see when you stepped outside the plane?
Could you describe what you saw when you looked out of the plane and you jumped? What was the scene like?
Well, it was just like lightning in the sky. But see, they were throwing up flak at us. And flak explodes. You don't see no flak. You just hear it come whistling by you. And every time there's a flash and there's some whistling, well, I didn't get hit that time. Mm-hmm. See? But we were scared sometimes it's going to hit our chute and cut some of our lines. And when we jump out, our chute will malfunction and we'll drop. But anyway, we jumped out of the plane. I figured that we was about 85 to 90 feet from the water. As we was coming over the swamp, they gave us the green light. And I came out, and just as the chute opened, bang, I hit the water. So the chute will always open at 85 feet from the plane. So that's the reason I know I was 85 to 90 feet from the plane, above the ground. And the planes kept coming over, and I looked up. It looked like a 4th of July celebration. I mean, their anti-aircraft guns were shooting at them, tracers going up through the planes and everything. And the planes kept on going. They didn't come down. They just kept going. But that wasn't so because there was a lot of planes were knocked down.
Isn't that an incredible account, Ray, of what firsthand personal account?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think what a lot of people don't realize, and we said this early on, but he's a medic. And think about how helpless you'd feel. You're on this plane, you're number 23 in the back, and you got 3 guys that are bleeding out in the plane, and your orders are to ignore them. And that goes against everything that you were trained.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't imagine.
Because that would be instinctual. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this guy is, and we'll get into this in a little bit later, this guy's been a caretaker his whole life. And so at any rate, we thought those were beautiful clips, but Ryan's got a few more to share with you.
Hold on, Ryan, before you do, because of what Ryan said a couple of minutes ago, that was an older clip. From now on, when I think of Tony's voice, I will think of, hello, but that's
kind of a Mickey Mouse thing, isn't it? It's kind of like a Mickey Mouse thing.
So beside the point.
What are you talking about? What's wrong with my voice?
I felt it needed to be said. On with the show.
See, now he knows who actually disrespected him before, and now I'm in the crosshairs. I see how this is.
Yes, I'm having a good time.
Okay, so when Leo jumps out of the plane, he lands in water. He lands in water, basically belly to like armpit deep. And he landed just west of Carentan on the west side of the flooded Douve River Plain. I think I'm pronouncing the Douve River correctly, or close to it. It's Oklahoma accent here. So, but he was immediately captured because there was a flak, basically a station just about 50 yards away from him that were just shooting at his plane. And they saw him come down in the water, and they essentially captured him after about 30 minutes of him playing hide and seek with those guys out in the water. Right. He was interrogated. He was put in holding in a pit in the ground with a bunch of other guys that were captured. But then later on, as the more and more people came in, the fighting got heavy. they needed another medic. So they brought Leo out of the hole to be a medic and work with the German medic. Then his best friend, Eddie Hall, was wounded and was brought in for Leo to work on.
Oh.
Now, I want to tell you one thing. Remember I told you about Eddie Hall? Well, after I was captured, they brought him in. 2 riflemen had been captured with him, and they were carrying him on a ladder. Eddie had been hit in the back, and the bullet came out here. And when they come out, they exploded out his stomach and blew his guts all over the place. And they come up there with him on that thing, and they were walking in his guts. They laid him down, and the German sanitator said, "Come on, you can fix him up." So I took a morphine surette and hit him in that arm, gave it to him, and hit him in that arm and gave it to him. And I said, "Eddie," I looked at his dog tag, he's Catholic. I took his hands and folded across his chest. There was nothing I could do but lie to him, truthfully. I said, "The Germans have got a hospital here, and when you come to, you're going to be just fine. You are lucky we got a hospital here." Eddie, close your eyes. Fara vår, du som är i himlen, helig vår ditt namn, till oss kommer det rike. Ske din vilja som i himlen, så också på jorden. And get some of his blood and put him across on his forehead.
That was the Lord's Prayer in Dutch.
And I repeated the Lord's Prayer in Danish to him, and ended it with Amen, Amen, Amen. And then I went over there and got another cigarette out and gave him another shot right here, so it hit him quick. In 5 minutes he was dead. He was bleeding profusely. What else could I do for Eddie? That's the way I got my first case. And so it's just like you say, there's a lot of wonderful things happen, but Eddie was my buddy. And it didn't make me cry or anything. Later on, I thought about it. Oh, golly. What is his girlfriend back in somewhere near Syracuse, New York? And I knew, he told me before we came in combat, Lois was her name, Lois Green. She said she had gotten pregnant in December, and she was carrying his baby.
So imagine that. That's the first case he had to treat, and it was his best friend.
Right. And then he's just got to move on.
You've got no time to think, no time to process. You're trying to survive yourself.
Right.
In that environment.
And earlier in the interview, he talks to Eddie. He talks about Eddie when they're in England, when they're in basic training together. And so it shocked us when we were in his house collecting this audio. It's like, holy crap, this guy that he just spent a lot of time talking about, these exploits he had had passed away. And in case the audience missed it, these morphine syrettes, there was some saying were one's for pain and two's for the afterlife or something like that. He gave him 3. Yeah. So he basically euthanized his best friend.
Yes. And while he's a prisoner himself, I mean, just the layers of that moment. And again, he's just got to keep, because if he doesn't do what he's told by the Germans, they could get rough with him. So he's just got to suppress and move on. That's horrific.
Yeah. So at that point, after the Battle of Normandy in that day subsided, he was marched with his hands on top of his head, wearing only a thermal shirt, no pants, no underwear, no shoes, and no socks, down the road in France with French girls walking by, and he's buck naked from the chest down, basically. He was shipped by train across Germany, and he would end up at Stalag 4B in Mulberg, Germany. Right. He would be put to work in the infirmary taking care of sick POWs. And next he talks about what he had ended up having to do as the head of the infirmary.
I was responsible for the burial preparation of 135 American soldiers who died in my ward. I had recorded the illness, the cause of death, the date of capture, and details of the same, and also the name and address of the prisoner's family. These records I kept so I could write each soldier's next of kin the hour and date their soldier boy died. When the Russians took over our camp, 4B, they burned the German officers to the ground. So there the records went. Missing in action. They're still missing in action. I know there's some of them. I know them. They're dead. But they said, we haven't got the proof of it. They said, you got my proof. They said, hell, you weren't an officer. You don't count.
Isn't that tragic? I mean, think of the families who think their sons are obviously still listed as MIA.
Right.
But Leo, if they hadn't burned down those barracks, those officers' quarters where all of his records were kept, he would have had 135 men off of that MIA list.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like y'all said a couple of minutes ago when y'all go to talk to people, sometimes a person might be more willing to share with a stranger versus a family member, because it's so much more complicated with a family member. But I've got to think that those families, like you were saying, Ryan, those families could have greatly benefited from a letter going, here's closure. Yes, he's not coming back. It's bad what's happened, but now there's no doubt, because it's the doubt that tears you apart and that gives you hope that you probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, you're right. And those letters, that closure is a big deal. And we'll talk about that on the last clip we'll share with you from General Matz. But some other things about Leo really quick. Mm-hmm. It sounded a little bit like he was reading at times from that last clip. It's because he wrote a memoir. And Ryan explained to the audience how he was able to write this memoir, how he kept notes of everything.
Yeah, actually, while he was a prisoner, they would take the labels off of some of the cans they'd get in their Red Cross packages. Right. And he would take notes of everything on the back of these labels of cans. And he had this whole ritual he would go through on making sure that they would divide the food exactly equally among the prisoners, because they didn't want anybody to feel like they were getting stiffed. Right. And he had all these labels to go by whenever he actually wrote this memoir.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. Yeah. Well, so anyway, I'm just moving on here in the interest of time. The last clip I want to play here, after Leo was actually liberated, his camp was liberated by the Russians. But he then witnessed, of course, the raping and the execution of women outside of the boundaries of the camp whenever they were free to come and go after they had been liberated. He made it back to the USA. He would be subjected, though, after he came back to our own country, to public ridicule. And he was called coward at restaurants that he would eat in for being a former POW.
They really quick before you play this clip, they wouldn't even serve him, Ray. He mentioned about pulling into some version of like a Walgreens to get some dinner. They would, when they found out they were POWs, they would not serve them. So that's something I think our audience, your audience, should probably know, is the reverence we have for POWs now. That was not always the case.
I did not know that.
We didn't know that either. And I think what happened is during Vietnam is when society started thinking, you know what, these guys went through, in many cases, more hell than the infantry who weren't captured, and they deserve our respect as well, because, no one wants to get captured, right? No one goes to war and saying, hey, I just want to go get captured. They don't want to do that. And the other thing that I want to say really quickly, you mentioned some of the rapes and stuff. He had a very negative view of how the Russians responded when they were let go. And there are some clips that we could share with you. They're on our podcast that we didn't want to subject your audience to, that are extremely, extremely disconcerting. But at any rate, Ryan, go ahead and set up the last clip.
Sure. So I think last year when we were on your show, Ray, we talked about how we were able to go to Normandy in 2022 with Bill Parker, who was a man we featured on your show last year. Right. While we were there, we actually had a map that Leo had given us when we interviewed him in 2003 that showed the spot where he landed, where he was captured.
Cool.
And so Tony and I, along with our wives, piled in a car. One morning we drove out, found this location, and we walked through knee-deep grass down a cow trail, and we ended up out on this area that was a dike, essentially, looking out over the plain toward, to the east towards Carentan. And we had with us Leo's own handwritten account of what it was like when he went back in 1999 and visited that spot.
Wow.
And we wanted to film ourselves reading his account from the very location that he sat at 20 years prior to that or so. Well, while we were there, something very interesting happened, and here's what happened.
This is almost like divine intervention, providence.
Thank you, Leo. That's an airborne paratrooper.
So while we're reading this,
yeah,
and they had the invasion stripes on it, even though it was a more modern transport. And Ray, this thing, it looked like it saw us out there, the pilot, and nosed over and flew right over our heads. I don't mean like we were reading this and a plane flew by.
Right.
I mean, it felt like, Ryan did some trick and called up the Air Force and say, hey, we're gonna trespass onto this person's property.
Can you fly around at 10:17 a.m.? Yeah.
Right. We're gonna go out there. And we'd like to have a flyover for our podcast. I mean, you couldn't have set it up any better than that.
Serendipitous, to say the least.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I'm just going to ask you, Ray, have you ever had these experiences where the coincidences are just so strange, so out of this world that you're maybe doing research and you come across something that just serendipitously, like you said, happens where it fits right into what you're looking for or something. We've had several instances where this is one of them, where it's almost as if, there's a divine hand there guiding this to happen, or Leo himself is saying, you know what, let's make this plane fly right over these boys,
I like that image.
I mean, and it's exactly how it impacted me that way. I just wonder if you've had any similar sorts of things like that.
Yeah, you do this long enough, and I think maybe subconsciously you start to pull things together that you later on figure out, or you don't even know that you're heading towards something. But yeah, when you have those magical moments, they just tend to work out when you really are dedicated to something and you do it a lot, and you end up creating opportunities for yourself that you don't know. And you're right. Sometimes it's like, if I can't, it's like that defied a lot of odds. What just happened? Yes. I mean, that's right. Makes you think. It certainly
sure
makes
does.
you think. Yeah.
It definitely makes us ponder. And as serendipity would have it, the podcast episode that you had us produce because of your illness and that you made fun of us for actually had to do with actually has to do with the next set of clips.
Okay. Well, I was going to make fun of you either way, but please continue, please.
So
this is
So what you prepared that I read from was Army Groups North foray into the Eastern Front, and ultimately going after Leningrad and then surrounding it, and then having the siege of Leningrad, which is one of the most historic sieges of any city in human history.
Absolutely.
And it just so happens that I think back in 2006, I interviewed somebody who went to our church. His name was Johannes Grew. He goes by John Grew, and he was a German. He immigrated over here in the 50s, and he served in the Wehrmacht. He served in the 489th Grenadier Regiment, the 269th Division of the 18th Army of Army Group North. And and here it is. You're having kind of me read this for that podcast episode. of yours, which just dropped 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Right.
And so I pulled out like 3 or 4 clips. I wasn't going to feature Gru this year, but I think we will now. I have 8 DVDs worth of material on him.
Wow.
I went to his house for 5 weekends straight. He was, I think, 99 at the time. And the audio quality is not ideal. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of narrating, a little bit of amplification of what's said.
All right.
But I just thought, hey, you're covering a northern front around Leningrad. Let's hear from a German who was part of that. So the first clip, one of the things that we ask our American veterans often is like, did you ever think that we would lose the war? And they all say, hell no, we're not going to lose the war. We're America. But I wondered, as these Germans were marching east into this frozen tundra, it got colder and colder, and they were under this siege. Did they feel the same way? And so go and play this first clip, Ryan.
Yeah, I think we did. Because we had no reason to doubt it. Because we were in Norway, we had all our friends. The British, they just hung on for dear life. We had all of Russia to speak as of Western Russia, you know. And we had enough to eat.
So basically what he said there is, we were going to win the war. We had dominated Western Europe. We had defeated France. Britain was on the ropes. You were rolling through the Mediterranean campaign, where outside of some of the battles with Admiral Cunningham, the British were on the ropes at this time. They certainly were. Yeah, they were in no position to do anything with the Germans. So if this is emblematic of the German at that time, and he joined this effort in September of 1941. Then it goes to show that you had an army with high morale. He said they weren't hungry. They felt like they were going to win this war. Yeah,
they hadn't lost yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the next clip, we've had 3 clips. This is the second one. Is they make the transition. The German army makes the transition from attack to siege. And in the script that you wrote, you speak of that transition. Right. As Adolf Hitler and Army Group Center decide to focus their efforts on Moscow. And so here's some of the things that were going on in the early days of the siege. So go ahead and play this clip.
And you never knew what was, you couldn't see very far. You know, the Russians could sneak up on us real close, and we snuck up real close on the Russians too. And there are some things, we had one guy, he knew Russian, and he snuck up on the Russian guards patrolling there, you know, and they were talking. I said, what they talk about? Oh, they're talking about their girlfriends. That's the same thing everywhere. Yeah. In the world. You know, they couldn't give a flip. You know, they didn't want to be there. They don't want to be there today. Yeah. It's still there.
It's all the same, isn't it, Ray?
Yes. Things never change.
They never change. So a German who speaks Russian sneaks to the Russian trenches to eavesdrop, and they're talking about girlfriends or talking about not wanting to be there. Yeah, it was like that World War I. It's like that in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, the human condition. You want peace, stability, love, encouragement, not being in the trenches.
It's the same thing. Yeah. And this last clip is a little unsettling. It might be good that the audio is not as great, but right. I'll explain it. So let me set this up. So he has his photo album out, and he's going through pictures. And there's one picture he stops. It's a picture of a 37 millimeter anti-tank gun. So Gru was a medic during this, and he was a medic for this battalion. It was an anti-tank battalion of the 489th Infantry Regiment. And so when the line stagnated, the men started to, I don't know, get bored, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And this is one of the things that he witnessed.
Yeah, we were evil.
You were what?
Evil.
Well, yeah. I don't, it's kind of a strong word, don't you think? You think we were evil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I did here?
Mm-mm. I think.
That turned the Russians were on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Russian soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Only the boys here, they decided not to kill any tanks. There were no tanks.
Mm.
So I just aimed this on the boys, on the Russians. They're bang. And you saw a head flying there, another body flying. That's evil.
Wow. That's war.
When the guys stood there, oh, good.
Yeah.
Mm. So what he just said, again, the audio is difficult to hear. He's almost 100.
Right.
They took their anti-tank gun and they were aiming it, instead of at tanks, at there's a gap in the trench across from them that the Russians were in.
Right.
And once in a while they could see a Russian go by. And they would shoot a 37 millimeter anti-tank round at these Russians. And when they hit them, he said the head would fly off in the air. And they would all cheer and go, hooray, hooray. Yeah. And so, you know, I think the reason I wanted to pull these clips for your audience, Ray, as we talk about the siege of Leningrad, is just because there's a siege doesn't mean there's not a bunch of horror. It's not like you had two armies just kind of sitting around waiting it out.
Right.
They were doing these terrible, despicable things every freaking day that was going on. I think the English called it during World War I wastage. Wastage was just the number of men who died every day because they were fighting in a trench, even when there was not an offensive operation going on.
Absolutely, yeah. No, because you literally have to dehumanize in order to get to that point. There's a saying, something like, there's very few things that are more dangerous than a bored soldier. You got a bunch of kids around. Yes. They got guns. They got stuff. They're going to come up with ways to distract themselves.
And that's what they were doing. And that's why he said that they were evil, because this is how they distracted themselves. And to me, I still think it's a strong word. I think evil is in the hearts of all of us.
Right.
But I think that there are certain situations that you put people in, and they're capable of anything. And I don't think that makes them evil. It makes them kind of a victim of. Do you think any of those guys wanted to be sitting in those trenches doing that crap? None of them.
Exactly. And they've been programmed, at least since 1933 when Hitler came to power, that everything that he says is right, you do your duty. And again, it's kind of hard for Americans. I know you know this already, but it's kind of hard for Americans to fully appreciate the concept of duty to a German citizen in the 1930s, in the 1940s, when they gave their word to the leader of their country. They meant it. They meant it to the point where a lot of them couldn't really resist until he killed himself. That's how binding that concept is for them.
You are 100% correct. He ended up writing this 100-page memoir, and we're going to put it on our website. So, and anytime we feature a veteran, I create a little web page and I put any documents they shared with us. So you can check it out.
Yeah.
And he speaks to exactly what you said, Ray. That this honor oath thing, there's a degree of seriousness that he said Americans do not understand when it comes to German culture.
Exactly.
And I want to end with just one quick thing that I read from this about. So again, we're talking about the siege of Leningrad. This is what the living conditions were like. He writes, there was no electricity, no water in the house that they were staying in, but they had boxes for flowers mounted under most windows. For water, people had to go to the village lake, which was right next to the sauna. During the winter, a big hole enough for a bucket had to be kept open. The bucket was on a long rope and kept near the hole. And the first time I got water and poured it into a container, some water splashed on my uniform and froze instantly. I simply brushed off the ice. There was no wet spot. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Oh,
that's cold.
These are the conditions that they were living in. So I I just wanted to kind of share with your audience a little bit more about the human condition behind a really important segment that you're going through right now on your timeline.
No, I'm glad you did, and you made the point earlier about they're having to switch from the offense to the defense. I mean, one, they hadn't lost yet. Two, they were able to tear up to that point to get close to Leningrad and to suddenly slowly realize over what the thing was like three and a half years, the siege was, that you're not going to win. I mean, so you suffered all of that hardship for nothing. So, but yeah. We do what we're told to do, right?
Pretty much, especially the Germans during World War II.
Yes.
So, I mean, one of the things that struck me listening to him describe that, first of all, you could tell he started talking very soft, like he was embarrassed about it.
Yes.
He was ashamed of what they did, and it could have been a World War I veteran telling that story. It sounds exactly like something that they probably did back, trench warfare back in World War I, and very powerful. I mean, Tony, I can't wait to hear the rest of that series whenever we start getting into that stuff. He sounds fascinating.
And Ray, we'll let you know when we drop it so you can check it out. I mean, there are some things that he says on these 8 DVDs that are, holy crap, gird your loins, as Ryan would say when you listen to it. Oh my Lord.
And can I just say, I mean, yes, that when he said evil, maybe the word cruel might have been a little bit more apt. But the point is, and again, this is why I wanted you gentlemen to come on the show. He was there. He was a participant. He was a witness. I mean, that's just staggering. And you just really appreciate them sharing their experiences with us.
Amen. Even though we have disrespected you and you don't like us, we are kindred souls, Ray. There's a lot of things that we agree with, whether you like it or not. I don't know what to say. So, so we have 4 more clips from a different veteran that will wrap this up.
Okay.
This veteran is Major General William Matz, and William Matz has distinguished himself his entire life. He was someone who joined the military in the early 60s. He fought in the Vietnam War with distinction. He won the nation's second highest honor behind the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross. He won the Silver Star, the Purple Heart. He won, 4 merits of Legion Legions of Merit. Thank you. The LOMs. He served under 5 different presidents in very high-ranking capacities, starting with Reagan and ending with Trump. And he did all of these exploits as someone who had a withered leg from childhood polio.
Oh, wow.
So before we play this first clip, here's how we set this up. He's a young man. He has childhood polio. One leg is withered. He wears a size 9 on that shoe, on that foot, and a size 12 on the other. And yet he makes it into the military. He joins an airborne unit, the 82nd Airborne. He goes to Korea. This is after the war, but he goes to Korea to kind of get infantry training. And then the Vietnam War goes hot, and he's a company commander of a riverine force south of Saigon in the Mekong Delta. So his job, he's got 150 men. They're on boats. He's never trained to fight from boats before. He's in the Army, for God's sake. He has to figure that out. And their job is to go and interdict and disrupt the VC that are just infested in this area. And it's just before Tet Offensive when he gets there. He gets there basically
December of 67.
Exactly. And then Tet would be just the following year. So in this first clip, I think this is his 4th time in combat. And he wins the Silver Star. This is December 4th, 1967.
Next to the Tet Offensive, which would happen, a month or so later, December 4th was the worst fight I was in. We were ambushed. We were going up the Rock Rung Canal. Early morning hours, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and there was a Vietnamese Marine battalion that was attached that preceded us. They got through the ambush area, and then they hit my boats from both sides, and we had the beach. They killed the Navy coxswain who was in my boat, and we beached and lowered the ramp and went up and then fought for the next day and a half. The VC were on both sides of the banks, and it was a tough day. It was a bad day.
And so his commendation for the Silver Star, I'm not going to read it word for word,
Right.
but basically the reason he got the Silver Star is they went in this beach hot. Is think of it kind of like a little baby Normandy, where you go in and all your men are fallen.
Right.
And he led from the front. He called in fire support. He exposed himself, they say, courageously exposed himself to hostile gunfire in order to run to the lead element in direct gunships and artillery. He got chastised by a lieutenant colonel after this battle for using the gunships too much. He said, basically this lieutenant colonel said, we got 3 other companies out there. So he was in charge. There's 3 companies to a brigade. He was in charge of Company C.
Right.
And he told that lieutenant colonel to go to hell. he's like, well, then get more gunships. These are my men out there.
Yeah.
And
whatever
I'm
it takes to survive. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it was just a month after this where Tet Offensive would start, and this is where he would earn the 2nd highest medal for valor in the United States, the Distinguished Service Cross. Go ahead and restart that. We're going to leave all this edit in there. Let me say one more thing about this clip for the audience.
Yeah.
He would win this Distinguished Service Cross. He was Company C. Tet Offensive had started. He had gone in. Company A was pinned down. There was 4 men who were wounded, and they were trapped. And the question I asked him before this clip was, you're a captain. You've got lieutenants and sergeants and privates. Why did you go out there and rescue those 4 men? That's why he got the Distinguished Service Cross. And here's his answer as to why he went out there.
Because a couple other men had already tried. We lost the lieutenant platoon leader doing it. 1 or 2 other men had tried. And remember, this is A Company now. See, I had moved up. These were A Company people. Mm-hmm. So when I got up there on the scene and this one guy is screaming and yelling, sir, there they are. You got to get them. I'm not saying panic was setting in, but I just said, shit, I'm the guy here. I'm not going to tell other people to get down and get them.
All of this with a withered leg from childhood polio. Let me read these 2 sentences from his award.
Right.
It reads, while directing his company in the attack, Captain Matz discovered 4 casualties pinned down by withering fusillade. He immediately ran to the aid of one of them and was wounded in the arm, was shot in the arm as he dragged him to a safe position. Ignoring his painful injury, he made 3 more trips through heavy hostile fire to rescue the remaining men. And then he would continue to fight for several more days afterwards, after he rubbed some dirt in his arm from the bullet wound and kept going.
Jeez. Okay, I'm never going to complain about anything ever again. Oh my God, I'm a pansy.
Dude, we all are compared to this guy. He's 85 years old. You listen to his voice. He's writing a book right now. It's going to be great. And we got two more clips to share with you. One is, we've seen these scenes probably in the movies or read in books about you have to write the letters home. Well, that falls on the captain. Actually, no, that's the last clip we're going to play. The next one we're going to play is on, I said, what was the most challenging thing you had to learn as an infantry captain in combat? And this is what he said.
But you are taking casualties. And when do you sort of stop the momentum of your attack and get those casualties out? And the men, as soon as the guy's hit, you hear medic, medic. The screaming of that medic still rings in my ears. So that was that always was on my mind. And as I look back and as I've been writing my book this last year and a half, these things come back to me. And again, I was just a young officer, but it's when do you stop the fight? And once you stop the fight, you're giving the enemy the edge again.
So Ray, I'm sure, and Ryan, you guys have seen like movies where men are attacking and they're falling.
Right.
And when do you say stop? We're done. We're retreating.
Yeah.
It's
like a mathematical formula. You play the odds, you play the percentages, I guess.
Yeah, because you got these 2 missions, right? Then they're kind of conflicting. One is two objectives. One is to accomplish the mission.
Right.
And the other is to do it with the fewest amount of casualties as possible.
Tony, I don't like to compliment you like ever, but that's a brilliant point. It's like, you're exactly right. Do this, but lose as few guys as possible. I mean, it's just, how are you supposed to thread that needle, I guess, is the same.
Yes. And now, so this last clip about the letters home he had to write kind of comes full circle. If you remember in a Leo Westerholm clip, he had kept records of all the men he had to bury so that the people back home, their family, had some closure.
Right.
And it's really important. And Matz talks to this on this clip.
Yeah, because this is a letter coming from me who was with their soldier when he died.
Yes. Yeah.
This is not the stateside chaplain coming in saying something, but I was there. I may not have been right next to their son or husband or whatever, but I was there and tried to explain the operation as best you can. And I have letters today from people who've written back to me, families who thanked me and so forth.
Wow.
I mean, I don't want to write those letters. Do you?
Exactly. I would not even. What do you say? There's nothing you can say that will make those people feel any better.
And the thing I did not know, and I didn't include because the clip would be too long, is that how this worked was if someone was a KIA, they died.
Right.
The captain who would write the letter had to wait until the State Department notified the family stateside through this chaplain or whomever to say, hey, your son or daughter has died in combat, and we regret to inform you of that. Then they would let the company commander, the captain, know. And it was their job to send a message to those individuals that described in much more detail the events that occurred where that individual had been killed. Right. And it reminds me of a story that I heard when I visited Arlington National Cemetery years ago, where apparently some American general was taking a general from another country on the tour of the cemetery. And the foreign general said, now I know why you Americans fight so hard, because you take better care of your dead than you do your living. And it was powerful. And what he meant by that is these things that the American Army does, these are all things that cause these men to be willing to fight, to go out there, to know that they're important, that they won't be forgotten, they won't be left behind, they won't be fertilizer left in the Mekong Delta. And I thought it was really powerful to hear from someone who had to write those letters.
Yeah, we certainly do honor the men and women in uniform. What's the saying? They're on the wall. They're standing on the wall, keeping us safe. So we certainly do appreciate that. If you have anything else, please let me know. But go ahead, Ryan.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I just want to make one last statement. One of General Matz's last assignments was he was the head of the American Battle Monuments Commission.
Oh, wow.
So he was in charge of all the military cemeteries around the world, and it was very fitting. I mean, this is a man who would understand the necessity, like just that last clip of the letters home, and when do you stop the fighting? He understood what was behind all this. So I think it was a fitting, assignment for him. And man, his voice is so clear. Everything sounded so great. It's one of the best interviews I think that we've done in a long time, and Tony did a great job with it. So
he had some powerful words. So please feel free to add anything else you want. But before we go, remind everybody again of your podcast and your mission.
Yeah, so the podcast is the Warrior Next Door podcast. It can be found on any major podcast sites. We also have our own website, warriornextdoorpodcast.com. And you can go on that but the website, and see the latest happenings. And also there's you can see a web page is available for every veteran we feature on our podcast. If you click on it, you can not only access the podcast, but the raw interview that we pulled clips from, and any supporting documents, any maps, any memoirs they shared with us. it's turning into a really interesting repository. And if you visit the podcast since the last year that we met with you, Ray, we've had buglers on battleships. We featured POWs, Navy signalmen. Hell, we even featured a house. We have a podcast episode on a freaking house. Right. So
that's how much we're digging into the bottom of the barrel here. No, just kidding.
No, it's a really interesting story. So we definitely appreciate the fact that your wife and you allow us to be on your podcast. Our audiences are very similar. I think we complement each other well. Absolutely. And man, dude, we look forward to this every year. I'm not just saying that. I'm over here like all giddy. I'm probably gonna have a beer at lunchtime just so I can calm down.
I'm going to have a beer either way. Oh, and I should have told everybody at the beginning of the show, I'm coming off the effects of NyQuil. So if I made less than normal sense, that's why. So I apologize.
I don't think you need a beer. Just go do another shot on NyQuil. I mean, it's the same effect, right?
Then I'll be good. But yeah, no, but seriously, I really do appreciate you guys coming on and what the work that you're doing, like you said, complements this very well. And in a lot of ways, it's so much more important. So unless something incredible happens, we'll go ahead and book for next November. Right. So put that in your calendar and we'll go from there. But again, Ryan, Tony, thank you very much. And I hope one of you have a great day.
Fair enough. All right. Take care. We're going to take care.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Chuck the Goat from Goat USA. I wanted to break into your podcast and tell you about the new Goat USA store at Garden State Plaza. Check us out next to Seasons 52 across from Fogo de Chao. Be the goat by wearing the goat and gift your loved ones with the greatest apparel of all time. Heavenly soft and incredibly durable, Goat USA sweatshirts and joggers are the most outstanding gifts this holiday season. So come see us at Garden State Plaza. And if you don't know, you soon will. Goat USA. Apparel for kids and adults. Chuck out.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.